Welcome to Globespan 24x7 as we bring you our Monday night program from New York and from Guyana. We want to thank you, our viewers, for joining in. We want to thank our sponsors for being part of this program. We want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and of course, Devin Bisu, our technical specialist. Devin has told us he has an assistant now, Lekram, so we want to welcome Lekram as well as part of our technical team. This evening, and a very cold winter evening here in New York. It's extremely cold today. I understand it's extremely hot on the other part of the world, Guyana and Trinidad. But that's the nature of climate, I think. So we have to make do of that. This evening, we are very honored to have with us as we spread our wings across the Caribbean. Some time ago, we had a minister in the Trinidad and Tobago government. And tonight, we are honored again to have yet another minister. This time, we are having the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. He's no stranger to Guyana, no stranger to Trinidad. And we want to welcome Senator Clarence Rambharat, who is the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. Minister, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And good night to New York, good night to Guyana, good night to the diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora who follow us. And I hope that we deliver a good program to you tonight.
Thank you. And of course, my co-host is no other than Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome to the program.
Welcome, Charles, and welcome, Minister Rambharat. It's a pleasure having you here today.
Minister, as Guyana prepare tomorrow, as you might know, that they're having a conference on oil and gas, and we'd have thought your Prime Minister would have been there. The Prime Minister of Barbados is there. The President of Suriname is there. And so we thought Trinidad should be part of it. I see you was also part oil and gas minister. So you want to give us a little history of what you did in your life before you became minister.
Well, thank you very much. I am actually a lawyer by profession, so I was admitted to the bar 27 years ago. I was born on the east coast of Trinidad and Tobago. I was born, my great-grandfather was an indentured laborer, and my maternal and paternal grandfathers were pundits. And I was raised on the East Coast in an agriculture family, and we continued to be farmers in the main and professionals. And I studied in Barbados and was admitted in 1995. My career has taken me through private practice, and my early work in private practice, it was essentially working with state companies in Trinidad and Tobago, in particular those which were going through restructuring, historic legacy companies which were in liquidation and which were being wound up, and dealing with things like asset management and pensions and those things. I entered the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago in 1998 and was there for the voluntary separation and the closure. First, the reorganization of the industry, and then the closure of the industry. I was abroad on a government fellowship for a while. I returned, I worked in the health sector, I worked in oil and gas, and all along lecturing at the University of the West Indies. And then I moved to Canada, where I worked in finance. I also lectured in Canada, and then I returned to Trinidad and Tobago, where I contested the general elections of 2015 and 2020. I was appointed to the Senate in 2015. I was appointed Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries in 2015, and I was reappointed to the Senate in 2020 and reappointed Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries in 2020. I'm also the leader of government business in the Senate, so it means that I'm responsible for managing the affairs of the Senate.
Very accomplished list of things, dear Minister. I know before we start the program, you have two firsts in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
In 2015, you want to tell us what those firsts
are?
In
1950, we had parliamentary politics from 1956. The PNM was founded in 1956 and contested those elections, highly contested elections, and most of the constituencies had significant rivalry. My recollection was that there were 24 seats, and my community, which was the Mayaro area, there were 13 parties, in fact, that contested that election, and the PNM won and remained in power right up to 1986. And there had been a convention, I say a tradition, and maybe eventually a convention, that when you contest an election, if you lose, you would not be appointed to the Senate, or you would not be, well, the only way you could get into the cabinet was through an appointment in the Senate. It had been a practice, and I would say a convention. And in 3 weeks before the 2015 election, on the platform, Dr. Rowley announced that I would be appointed Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. So he made the appointment before the election, and after the results of the election, when the cabinet was appointed, I was appointed to the cabinet, becoming the first person to be appointed, having lost an election. Of course, in 2020, as fate would have it, I contested again and lost, this time in a different constituency. As I said before, I was reappointed to the Senate and to this ministry. I must say also that when I was appointed, there were 16 ministers of agriculture before me, and on average, they served about 2 years and 3 months. Very few ministers of agriculture actually completed a 5-year term. In fact, when I completed my 5-year term, I had been the first to do so in 30 years. So having a second term of as Minister of Agriculture is not something that happens very often, but I consider it to be important, because in many of us, when we eventually get to this office, find that 5 years move very quickly, and you really need, particularly in agriculture, where you have a lot of I would say decay, a lot of broken systems, a lot of challenges to overcome. It takes you a while to really get the ministry moving again and getting the sector moving again.
Yeah, Minister. So that's another first you have there. For a long time, being Minister of Agriculture for 5 consecutive years. As you said, the average was 2 years and like 6 months. So you have done, that's another first in your cap. Minister, you must have been doing well. That's why the Prime Minister has reappointed you as the minister. And I see, Minister, your father was a forest officer. I actually studied in Trinidad at ECIAF in Centeno. I don't know if your father went to that same college as well.
Absolutely, you may have been in class with him. My father was in the class of 1969 to 71, and
no, I was in 80 to 82, so I was a little lot.
In fact, yes. So I actually have the responsibility of leading the ministry that he worked in. So basically, apart from being third generation in agriculture, I also had the opportunity in growing up, because he was one of those. He worked in forestry division, and he was one of those persons who actually worked and traveled a lot. He was assigned different parts of the country, and we would go with him sometimes. And so I grew up knowing the ministry, but I grew up knowing forestry, in particular wildlife conservation. So by the time I came in, the ministry itself was not something that was strange to me.
At that time, Bal Ramdial was the Commissioner of Conservative Forest at that time.
Well, he wrote a lot. One thing I knew about Bal is he was one of those conservatives that wrote a lot and communicated a lot. He had quite a few publications. He brought in the public speaking competition related to wildlife conservation and forestry. He brought the International Forestry Conference to Trinidad and Tobago, and I had a lot of. Up until my father's death in 1993, he died long before his retirement. I had interacted with most of the conservators who were alive in my time. So I knew Bal, I knew Selvin Dardane. Anthony Ramnarayan came much longer. Some of them, Lakan, Narayan Lakan was another one. And I knew the division. I knew the division well, which sometimes works against the division because I have an idea of how well it worked in those days.
That's incredible because Ramnarayan was the deputy director at ECIAF in forestry at one time, then he became the conservator. So you have a long history of forestry and agriculture, Minister.
I must say, looking through, I mean, I was just born when he was at ECIAF. In fact, my parents they were originally from the East Coast, and then they moved to Moruga when my father was posted there to work, and my 4 siblings were born when they were there. And then they returned to the East Coast where I was born. And at that time he was in ECIAF. And one of the things that struck me in the photos is the integration with people from the region, because as you know, ECIAF had the students from across the region. And a lot of them, they would always be home by us. They did a lot of socializing, a lot of movement around the country. And I think it really strengthened the bonds, not only amongst the group, but within the region where they could rely on each other for support across the region, having graduated. And ECIAF is really one of the outstanding institutions in the region.
So ECIAF has a friend in the Minister of Agriculture.
Absolutely,
so.
Yeah.
Okay, Minister, you also, as we talked before, you also work in Canada, and you were also a professor both in Canada and Trinidad and Tobago in constitutional and administrative international law. So you really did a lot of different things, and now being charged, given to chart the course for agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago, it must have been a challenge to you.
Well, in terms of, I started off at University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, where most of the law students would start, and then I moved to Cave Hill. And I'm from a family of teachers also. So my mom has had a preschool almost all my life. At age 77, she still has it, and we grew up in education. And I've always said that coming from the East Coast, I think that the only way you could really get a career and you could really work and maybe see the world is through education. I'm a big advocate of 2 things in this world. I am an advocate of. One is education, and the other is sport. And education is important, and based on my experience as a student, I felt that long before I graduated, I was actually already teaching. And then as soon as I entered the university system before I finished law school. And when I finished law school, I got additional courses at UWI, and for many years I was there. I had a varied course load, varying from law, business, international trade, administrative law, industrial relations, a range of courses. And again, when I went to Canada to work, I continued lecturing. But so I found that as professionals in the region, it's very important that we make a contribution to the university, the school system, because you find that, yes, I respect my colleagues who are full-time academics, but it is also important that people who have the experience in industry could also, on a part-time basis, come into the classroom and lecture. Of course, the virtual environment really creates a lot of opportunities. Even for me, it has allowed me to participate in things, including this, that I would not have been able to participate with because of the need to travel. And sometimes travel could be very disruptive. So by the time I was appointed minister, I think my party itself, the PNM has a program of developing its membership, people who show potential or people who have an interest. So I consider myself to be a product of the country's development program, of the party's development program. But I also have a very unique experience. You're talking about unique experiences. I would share this one with you. I participated in the very first youth parliament in Trinidad and Tobago in 1987. The speaker of the time, Mr. Nizam Mohammed, who is a friend of mine now, he arranged the first youth parliamentary debate in Trinidad and Tobago, and I had the opportunity to participate in that. And then much later on, when Canada organized its very first model Canadian Parliament, I had the opportunity also to participate in that. And I think both had a significant impact on me in terms of my preparation.
So politics was in your blood, Minister, for a long time, from the days of your youth.
I think that in this region, cricket in your blood, politics in your blood, curry in your blood, they have some things. But you know, you haven't studied in EKIAF and had that exposure, and I'm sure Dr. Rose, whose CV is far more varied than mine. The thing about it is that once we get out of our communities and experience the wider national public, we start seeing how important it is for specific voices to be contributed. Otherwise, the discourse and the policies would be one-sided. And then when you experience the diaspora, when you experience outside the region, you get stronger as a Caribbean person, because you see how sometimes we criticize our countries and we criticize the region, and you go out there into the larger countries and you start seeing that they have some of the challenges that we have. They have bigger challenges too, and you feel sometimes more committed to make a contribution to the development of the region.
Thank you. Dr. Rose?
Yes, Minister Senator. Now, let me go straight to the heart of the topic here. Trinidad and Tobago, in physical size, is 5,128 square kilometers, or 1,981 square miles. How much of this territory, this land, is used for farming?
A significant part of the geography is in forest reserve. A significant part is in forest reserve. And I would say available for agriculture maybe about at most 20% of the land available for agriculture now. When we had the sugar industry up until 2003, the sugar industry was 77,000 acres. The other big user of land, or the other big reserve of land, is the energy sector. So you have the pipeline corridor that supports both the crude and the gas, and then you have the on-land fields that the infrastructure that is supported, and also those reserve areas which may have energy potential that are reserved. So in the forest reserve takes up more than 1/3. The energy sector uses, in terms of infrastructure and reserve, a significant portion, and the former sugar industry had maybe the third part of it, some of which have come back to us and are available for traditional and other types of agriculture.
Let me ask you a semi-political question. Under Spanish rule, Trinidad and Tobago capital was called Puerto Rita de España. Then that name was changed into Port of Spain, which still maintained the Spanish connections. Were there any consideration to change the name of the capital?
Not yet. But I would tell you that you strike a chord right there, because we have for example, one of the facilities that is under my responsibility is in the Lopino area, where Comte de Lopino had a cocoa estate up there, and played a significant role up there. And there is a house that was occupied by him as part of an estate house that is now a tourist site, and we have a movement up there from residents who would like to have Comte de Lopino removed from the name and the records. There's also the former Governor Picton, against whom there were movements in other parts of the world. There's a street in Port of Spain named after Picton, and there's small noises about renaming that. So the rename, even Columbus, where we have, I believe we have one in the city and we have one in Moruga, 2 statues that I know about. There's also been some movements along the lines of what is taking place globally, but there is no movement in relation to Port of Spain. We had the former King George V Park, which is just northeast of the Queen's Park Oval, was renamed Nelson Mandela Park. I don't think it was under pressure from anything related to the monarchy. It was on the basis of finding something that we could recognize Mandela in a meaningful way.
Okay, it is my understanding that prime ministers after prime ministers have been asked about the name and changes and so forth, but they resisted it, saying that it doesn't make sense at this stage. It is a known capital worldwide, and it's no use for us to change it now. But Brazil capital was changed to Brasilia, and Nigerian capital was changed to
Nairobi. Nairobi.
No,
that's Kenya.
No, Nigeria, not. Anyway, it was changed. So why not change the capital, and it will be learned easily by the people?
I am not saying first is that I am not an advocate of change. I do have a view on it, and then second, I am not aware of any movement. But I'll tell you this: if you boarded a CAL flight, a Caribbean Airlines flight, you will still see a BW number, and that is an illustration of how complex it is to allocate this number in the global airline travel system, and to change it. So if it is that difficult with Caribbean Airlines, I could imagine what it is like to change the name of a capital city. It would take, I'm sure, some time before it is completely changed in around the world. But it is not something that I have a view on. It is not something that I have a view. And if that is the view of the national community, I'm fine with it.
No, a very smart answer, because 76% of people said no changing of names.
We've made some in San Fernando, for example. Street naming is a municipal function. So the municipalities, they have been doing some renaming in San Fernando, particularly in relation to cultural icons and so on. And in Port of Spain, where we had Queen Street for as far as I know, as the city, it was changed to General Penny Comisión Boulevard, which is not a bad idea. She's still beautiful, and she was our Miss Universe 1977.
Has there been any places or streets named after first Prime Minister Eric Williams and other Prime Ministers, to your knowledge?
Williams made it very clear that he wanted no recognition in those forms, but we didn't listen to him. So Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, which was at that time state of the art, it was built by the French company Soditech. It's in the area called Mount Hope, or you could also call it Chamflaise. And it's a 100-acre site, and that facility was named after Eric Williams. And then the financial complex in what was then the tallest buildings in the city, the Twin Towers, were named. One was the Eric Williams Financial Complex, was named after him, and we also renamed the library on Knox Street, well, the library was converted as a home of the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, which is stored at UE, and that is a tribute to Eric Williams.
As you know, Eric Williams has always been a major contributor to education at the University of West Indies and University of Trinidad and Tobago, UT. Well, not Trinidad, University of Trinidad to UT. So I will advocate that you name
I
UT,
don't have a problem.
Eric Williams University.
He had a problem with it, but I don't. But I mean, he's Eric Williams. I remember his death. In fact, his death disrupted my common entrance exam by having the date changed by either a day or a week, but it was around that time. And I followed. I was 11 and I followed. In fact, I made, in those days, I used to clip the newspapers and make these scrapbooks with these, certain topics. And I made a lovely scrapbook in tribute to him. And I did that because where I was born and when I grew up, the train from Port of Spain, when it left Port of Spain, there were two lines. One went to San Fernando and one came to Rio Claro and stopped in Rio Claro. And in the political campaigns, Williams and the PNM, all the parties would use the train to come to that part of the country to conduct the meetings, and my parents would have been very active in following meetings and so on. So I grew up knowing Williams, and in later years, in terms of reading, I think his work is certainly groundbreaking. His views have carried, through the course. It has survived, criticism and analysis, and he's really somebody that the region ought to be extremely proud about, and his books remain on the curriculum. We could do more and more to bring his work to life, of course, so that generations would understand, not only Williams, C.L.R. James, and right up the region, to Lewis, right up Bustamante, Manley, right through the region. We have made significant contributions, not only in the region, but outside the region. And part of it has to do, just as I spoke about ECIAF, when you look at Williams at university or CLR, you would see that they were part of a group they were from around the world, from the Commonwealth in particular, sent by their countries on scholarship. And then a lot of them would go back to Africa and to go back to India and make significant contributions to their countries, not only gaining independence, but being able to form the administrative and the political system that will allow their countries to build on the grant of independence.
It's an award-winning book from Columbus to Castro. Everyone should read that book. Very, very good. Well, now let me turn to something else. You were appointed Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries in 2015, and then reappointed to the same ministry as you stated in 2020. What improvements have you made to the fishing industry?
Well, I'm happy you raised the fishing industry, because when I came in, the European Union was on the verge of giving Trinidad and Tobago a yellow card, which is a warning card in relation to the seafood of Trinidad and Tobago being able to enter the European Union. Now, we do not ship seafood to the European Union, but it was an important wake-up call, because not long after the United States implemented measures calling on countries exporting to the US to make improvements in their practices and their policies and their law. And those mirrored the EU requirements, and we were given 5 years to meet those requirements. And the main reason for that is the absence of modern legislation to deal with fisheries management, the fisheries sector. Our current fisheries legislation, we still have it, is 103 years old. The law is just 9 clauses, and it is nowhere near what should be used in particularly in an oil and gas environment where you have significant work taking place right around the island in terms of seismic activities in relation to movement of vessels, in relation to activities that are naturally going to interfere with both your breeding ground and your fisheries activities. So my predecessor, the Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, is a former Minister of Agriculture. He commissioned work in 1992 to develop fisheries legislation, and 28 years after, he laid the bill in Parliament for modern fisheries legislation. That bill is going through the Joint Select Committee process. I chair the Joint Select Committee, and that is one of the most important pieces of work as a country we're going to do in fisheries, because if we don't do that, apart from the fact that we export significantly, we export more than 20 million US in fish pass through Trinidad into the US market, and of course on the coast, that is one of the significant economic activities available on the coast. So the ability to protect our breeding grounds, the ability to manage the fisheries in an efficient way, the ability to protect the activities in the marine environment, particularly as it relates to competing interests in terms of shipping line in the Gulf of Paria, 2 ports on that side, seismic activity and significant oil and gas on the southeast coast, and increasing interest in exploration up on the northeast coast. And then I haven't even spoken about Tobago, where there is also significant interest in oil and gas exploration. It is very important that we have that legislation. And in fisheries, I would say that is the most important work that I'm doing.
Okay, a question for you here. Agriculture contributes less than 5.5% to Trinidad's GDP. And it accounts for at least about 4.5 to 5% employment. What is the role of agriculture in today's economy?
Well, when you have oil and gas, and oil and gas may have struck the last blow to agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago, and we would see what it does to Guyana if the profits from oil lead to the growth of agriculture, or if the profits from oil actually lead to the increase in imported foods. So that the significance of agriculture is this. I always say, if you are an urban community, for example, in Port of Spain, you have, in terms of careers, a number of choices. You have a lot of options. But if you're on the east coast of Trinidad, if you're in Matlot, for example, on the northeast coast, your opportunities are limited to fishing and agriculture. So the significance of agriculture, and this applies across the region, the significance of agriculture in the GDP may be small, but the significance of it in terms of its economic contribution to a rural community is far, to me, that is a more important calibration that we should be looking at. The second thing is that it now across our islands, we see this issue of NCDs. Now, there was a time it's almost like a cliche that we talk about NCDs as though it's an abstract thing. The thing about it is that the change in our diets across the region, fueled by prosperity, the change in our diets has led to the change in our health profiles, to the point that while childhood obesity, for example, may have been a North American thing, it is endemic in the region. And the rise of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and those things are driven by lifestyles. So apart from the economic justification for agriculture as part of rural economies, there's also a health justification in being able to produce the things that are required to maintain healthy lifestyles. Yes, we could import it. but we can produce it more competitively, and growing it and having it close to us and having it part of our community, it makes it available for us for consumption.
What impact does soil erosion and climate change have on our
significant impact, in the sense that on the East Coast, for example, I've said over and over, I don't have the luxury of being a doubter when it comes to climate change, or a skeptic, because I have seen on the East Coast, we have from Manzanilla, when you leave Port of Spain, for example, and you go through Sangre Grande and you get to that, you're now on that eastern strip. The first sight of the sea is at the point called Manzanilla, and from Manzanilla to Mayaro, you have 17 miles of coast, and we've seen the significant erosion, coastal erosion that has taken place. It's taken, in some cases, it may have taken 150 feet of land, maybe more. So we see the impact of the coastal erosion. When you have that type of erosion, you have erosion to the infrastructure. So on the northeast and south coast, we have coastal erosion is impacting the fisheries infrastructure. We have to continuously spend more money to at least keep them in shape, and also to protect them. So that is just on the infrastructure side and the erosion side. But in terms of the different changes in the pattern of the weather, when we started, I told you that this is going to be, from all accounts, a very, very dry season, a brutal dry season, which means that we're going to be faced in agriculture with 1, water issues, 2, fire, and we're going to be faced on account of that. You may find you're likely to face some shortages, some need to import because of shortages and those issues. Every year, when you have a brutally dry season, you have the farmers who are allowed to extract water from the water courses, but during the dry season, when we impose water use restrictions, they're required to have an abstraction permit to do that. But they're now competing with the dam and needing to maintain water levels in the dam. So if the water levels are critical, then water would not be released into the water courses to service the farmers. So and at the same time, a very brutal dry season will lead to fires, which would destroy some agricultural holding, but it will certainly create problems in terms of the national environment. But climate change is real. And then you have across the world, we've seen that it's very difficult to separate it into 2 seasons, dry season and the rainy season, because you have longer periods of dry in the rainy and longer periods of rain in the dry, and you have more intense showers. So as it is now, when the region relies still heavily on open field traditional farming, and we still do some of our best farming in the region on river banks and very close proximity to water courses, we find that flooding is always going to be a risk. And yes, we need to move to shade houses and protected farming, vertical farming and those things, but it is because of our dependence on small and medium-sized family farmers. They are going to continue for a while still in the traditional agriculture, and it's going to be. We could plan for it. Because we know that this is the pattern, and we need to plan for it, and we need to transition the regional investment in agriculture. We need to transition into more climate safe agriculture.
All right, Minister, we'll take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue the discussion.
All From One Supplier is pleased to announce its online shipping for West Indian and American groceries. Order online at allfromonesupplier.com and with free shipping and deliveries to any part of the United States. Save time and energy to shop for all of your West Indian groceries from the safety of your home or office. We carry West Indian products like curry powders, meats and fish, dashing bush, pepper sauce, sodas, and your favorite snacks. All from One Supplier has it all. All from One Supplier fulfills and ships your order directly to you. So visit All from One Supplier today to start shopping, or call All from One Supplier at 718-551-3292 to handle all of your West Indian grocery needs. That's All from One Supplier, 718-551-3292. Free shipping, free deliveries, or curbside pickup from allfromonesupplier.com. Make your vacation a memorable one. Enjoy your trip just as if you are at home. Your music, your culture, and your way to have fun with all you can eat and drink at an all-inclusive vacation. You choose the all-inclusive vacation that suits you. July 14th to July 18th is Bollywood on the Beach, plus Indo-Cultural in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. July 21st to July 25th, Christian Community Week in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. July 28th to August 1st, Curry Duck Curry Competition in Cancun, Mexico. August 4th to August 8th, Caribbean Throwback Week, Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. And August 11th to August 15th, Soca vs. Indian, Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Seats are available from New York, Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, Newark, Canada, Trinidad, and Guyana. Meet up with family and friends, and plus make new friends at all these inclusive vacations. TravelSpan has your vacations, plus cheap seats to Guyana and Trinidad. Call TravelSpan today at 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. In Canada, call 647-557-6200. In Guyana, call 227-1701. And in Trinidad, call 645-1604. Folks, the Nest Restaurant is the place to dine for Guyanese and Caribbean dishes. It is the best restaurant in Queens. The staff is courteous, and Dave, the owner, is always there to welcome you. So for a memorable dining experience, visit the Nest Restaurant located at 12717 101 Avenue, South Richmond Hill. Go and make a reservation today, or takeout. Call 718-847-4035. Are you looking for investment opportunities or retirement, or even to relocate to Florida? Then Orlando is the place for you. Great deals with spacious land are available. Call Shanisa Jabbar for all your realtor needs at 321-217-1556. That's 321-217-1556. Or email her at shanisajabbar@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Globespan 24x7 as we have with us the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries of Trinidad and Tobago, Senator Clarence Rambharat. Minister, Trinidad have, as Dr. Rose mentioned, a small piece of land. And I know along your north to south corridor is a northern range. And of course, you're susceptible, of course, to heavy rainfall and then floods in the valleys. I remember at Ekiaf, sometime when the heavy rainfall, the entire place is flooded because it drained out from the northern range. What have you put in place to ensure that the runoff from the northern range? I know there's a lot of plantation of prominent crops there to prevent the water coming down to flood the lower plains. What have you done to enhance that sort of arrangement?
Well, it would be the minister who preceded me on your program. So drainage and water, while I have a role, is really under the Ministry of Works, and they, by law, they control the water courses and the irrigation systems and the pump systems. But what has happened and is not, Trinidad is not unique because of our history and our culture in terms of enforcing the law. The planning process and the grant of planning permission and those things in the region has always been problematic. So we've had unplanned developments And when you have unplanned developments, the infrastructure is not developed to match the needs of the developments. So you've had you've had backfilling, for example, will destroy the flow of water and will block some of the water courses. We've had a lot of that. We've had the cutting of the trees and the removal of vegetation on the hillsides. That silt will eventually find itself in the water courses. So then the water course is able to accept lower volume. You would have on paper you would have the depth, and on paper you would have the carrying capacity. But the reality is that water course has about 75% silt in it, and so that's a problem. And if you're not upgrading the infrastructure in terms of the pumps and so on, and in a lot of cases, as you head south, we depend on some of the old sluice gate system, some manually operated. If upgraded, then you would have problems. So my colleague, the Minister of Works, has a program that has helped me in terms of clearing the channels across the country, particularly in the food producing areas. So I'm talking about in the river swamp, that Plumita area, which is on the east coast, Manzanilla, Plumita, Bish, and that is where we have the river swamp, which is a significant point of collection for water, point of control, and of course an important environmental site. But as you talk about the northern range, that runoff from the hills comes down and ultimately ends in the Caroni swamp, sometimes leaving a part of destruction. So those channels have to be cleared. And when you look at the flooding now, when you look at the post flooding, you see a lot of tree trunks, you see a lot of bamboo, which is something. And those things they just one tree trunk just needs to get across a drain, a rather large drain, and you would see that it floods an entire community. And then you have, of course, with that, it ends up through the Caroni Bird Sanctuary and out in the Gulf of Paria, where you have the dumping of all that garbage, of course. So the clearing, the three things in relation to the flooding and the management of water has to do with the clearing of the channels, the maintenance of the infrastructure, and the upgrading of
Minister,
the infrastructure.
Trinidad has about 1.2, 1.3 million people.
Yeah, about that, I would say 1.3 plus our 14,000 Venezuelans who are here.
And a big chunk of Guyanese as well. But Minister, how much food does Trinidad produce? Because you export food as well. I mean, but in your agriculture, what percentage of food produced in Trinidad is used by Trinidadians?
Well, almost all the export market is something that it goes up and down. It depends on what the rest of the world is doing. It depends on sometimes the change in import environment in North America or in North America or in Europe, and it also has to do with availability. So what we produce is available for local consumption. But when you look at our plate, when we talk about the food import bill, I think every one of my predecessor promised to lower the food import bill by a percentage, and some said 20 and 50 and so on. And I said that, I don't plan to do that, because the food import bill is made up of things over which you have control and things over which you have no control. So for example, in the uncontrollables, we're going to import rice, we're going to import flour, we're going to import peas and beans, we're going to import cooking oil, we're going to import sugar, and I could go on and on about what we have to import. And the reason we have to import is, for example, let us look at rice. I appeared before Joint Select Committee of the Parliament as Minister. I appeared. Ministers don't do that very often. And I spent 3 hours talking to the committee about rice. So I'll say this about rice. When I was in sugar, we also did rice, and we had about 120,000 tons a year, a significant amount that the state company produced. Now, with the state company out and some of the land going to the private farmers. They were not able to sustain that level of production. But even if it did, the market is essentially a market for parboiled rice. We've never had a parboiling plant in Trinidad and Tobago. The market is for parboiled rice. So even the rice is one of the most supported commodity that we grow and produce in Trinidad and Tobago. And even with the support that we give, the bulk of the rice that we put in Trinidad and Tobago ends up being pet rice. And I went to the committee and I said, I cannot be using taxpayers' money, resources to be producing this expensive pet rice, because the price of long grain rice out of the US landed in the National Flour Mills plant in Port of Spain is lower than the price of paddy in the local fields. So we must import a significant portion of the rice we consume, and there is no local replacement for that. And when you go through those things like flour, we could make a case for flour substitutes. We could talk about cassava flour and dashing flour, sweet potato flour, but those are niche markets. Those are also going to be high cost alternatives to traditional wheat flour. So if you want to increase, if you say you're going to lower your food import bill by 20%, and the price of wheat on the international market goes up by 30%, and the price of some of the other commodities over which you have no control, if those go up, you would find your food import bill going up. And that is because it is uncontrollable. And the only way in which you could really impact food import bill in your uncontrollables would be the quantum that you import, which brings us to the consumption argument, that you cannot, no politician could say, I am going to reduce the food import bill. The country has to say, and individuals have to say, I am going to change my consumption pattern. Question is, are we eating too much? Are we overeating in the region? Are we eating too much? Over time, have we increased our consumption? Is it showing on the waistline? Is it showing on our longevity? Just showing on the quality of health? It is not just a mathematical decision or discussion on lowering the food import bill. It is a discussion on the quality of life we want to live, the amount we want to pay as taxpayers for health, and the extent to which we are willing to make the changes in our consumption pattern. And that change will be fueled by what we could grow, because the nutritionists for the last 150 years have not really changed. We've had South Beach diets, keto diets, we've had intermittent fasting, we've had a lot of fads in diets, but what goes on a plate has not changed. It's been carbohydrate, green leafy vegetables, and protein. That is what generally has been recommended to go on the plate. And the one thing in the region we could put on the plate, produced by us, is the green leafy vegetables, the fruit, and those things. We can put carbohydrates in the form of ground provision, understanding that not all ground provision are the same. And we can put meat in the form of poultry. Trinidad and Tobago is self-sufficient in poultry, and we could try to put some of the other meats that are grown in the region.
And Minister, you spoke a lot of the staple diet like rice and flour and so on. And Guyanese listening to you tonight, they will say, why is Trinidad not buying their parboiled rice from Guyana when we produce a substantial amount? You bring it all the way from the US. Are we not part of CARICOM, and the first priority is to support the CARICOM market?
Well, Dr. Rowley was speaking. In fact, today we made another significant move in our poultry sector, local poultry sector, by one of the local companies, Nutrimix, launched an $80 million modern hatchery facility, which is comparable to any other hatchery in the region in terms of its sophistication and what it will do for the poultry sector. And he made the point that CARICOM itself creates its own complexity and creates its own problems in terms of how we manage the flow of trade. So there is no opposition to Trinidad and Tobago getting rice from Guyana. It must be that there's some bureaucracy or there's some hindrance on the import side or on the export side that we need to work out. My colleague, Minister of Trade, and I encourage you to have her on your program. She's very, very well experienced former Minister of Foreign Affairs, one of those persons who have served in both houses, former elected MP and now a senator in her second term. And she's one of those persons who work really hard on smoothing the flow of trade into Trinidad and Tobago and out of Trinidad and Tobago. But I don't think that there is any resistance to Trinidad and Tobago because our seeds come. In fact, I have a good relationship with the rice farmers in Guyana, in Berbice in particular, and the rice board people, and I get seeds for our farmers from there, and we don't have a problem. In fact, we are establishing, a private company is establishing a parboil plant in Trinidad and Tobago, and that company, Trinidad owned, he also operates in Guyana. So there's no resistance. I think it has to do with the way in which we make things far more complex.
And Minister, as you know, with the oil and gas sector in Guyana, there are a lot of Trinidadian companies who are moving across there to help in the sector, and I think they're bringing a lot of expertise that Guyanese lacked at this point in time. So there's a lot of cooperation between Guyanese and Trinidad, and now I see Suriname being part of it and Barbados being involved in it, more involved in the region. So I look forward. Hopefully, we'll talk to your Minister of Trade to talk about rice in Guyana. Minister, was it in your view a mistake for the sugar industry in Trinidad to be closed at Caroni?
No, absolutely not. It was not a mistake. There were pressures on both sides. One is that there was the external pressure of what was happening in the global environment, and the other was the internal pressure of the state of our sugar industry. So let us go back to, there was a time when we were doing 200,000 tons of sugar, and our sugar, in fact, the region's sugar production was underwritten by the Commonwealth Sugar Agreement of 1950. So that is the agreement that gave us preferential pricing. And once we had preferential pricing, we worked towards that. And whether it was in Jamaica, St. Kitts, Barbados, or Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, we all suffered the same fate. And that is, as the international market changed, we did not make the adjustment because we had the preferential pricing, and we also had the state support. In fact, in Trinidad and Tobago, the first time we heard 100 million bailout of a state company would have been in the sugar industry, and the first time we heard about $1 billion debt write-off, it was in the sugar industry. So by the time we got to 1992, under Dr. Rowley as minister, he fashioned a tripartite group to look at the sugar industry and make recommendations. And that group tendered its report. One of the first recommendations was the write-off of over $1 billion in debt, which was done, and some other changes. And among the significant changes which were recommended was payment by quality. We paid by weight, as most other countries in the region did. And we paid by weight. And in fact, when we closed the industry in 2007, finally, we never moved that system to payment by quality instead of payment by weight. Then the factories themselves, the investment was not made when they were under Tate and Lyle and when they were under foreign ownership. You found that those owners upgraded and maintained and so on. But over a period of time, to the point that when we got to 2002, Trinidad was the 68th most inefficient sugar producer in the world without the support of the state. So our revenue from the sale of sugar at preferential prices could not cover our costs, and we depended on the treasury for a bailout. That's on the internal side, but on the external side, Thailand, Australia, Brazil, those producers, but particularly Brazil, that had invested in the industry. Remember, labor in Brazil is cheap, land is available, and the technology had been developed, most importantly, which allowed them to dual their factories to be able to produce ethanol when it was more cost effective to produce ethanol, and where the sugar price was attractive enough, they were able to switch their factories to the production of sugar, using technology, using world-class efficiencies and those things, and also benefiting from much cheaper labor. So they're the ones who pushed at the WTO for the dismantling the preferential process pricing. Under the Commonwealth Agreement, the ACP countries went into that negotiation with Europe for a transition. In fact, when I exited the sugar industry, I moved on a government fellowship into that arrangement in terms of the transition of the ACP countries out of sugar. The European Union provided the support for us. Not many of us used it in the way it should have been used for transition out of sugar in somewhere else in agriculture. And the support was given. And once the preferential pricing disappeared, most of the sugar industry in the region disappeared. Should we have come back into sugar in a form? Perhaps. There was a lot of talk in the private sector. One of the things they were talking about was liquid sugar. There was a lot of talking about sugar in a modern environment. There was a lot of talk about sugar and ethanol, and there was a lot of talk about a refinery, because our Trinidad and Tobago refinery would refine the brown sugar that we produce. It was not effective to do that. We switched to importing brown sugar to make our white sugar, and there was a lot of talk about doing that. But the difference in the environment post 2003, and particularly under me as minister, is that these investments in agriculture must be made by the private sector facilities.
So it wasn't a mistake in your view, it was an economic decision.
No, and I would tell you today it is the most attractive separation payment or package given to any employee anywhere in the region. It is the only separation package in this region, not Trinidad and Tobago, in the Caribbean region, that involved agricultural land, residential land, retraining, and other support in transition. And in fact, the program that VSEP has ultimately cost us about $18 billion. And to each employee, when you consider the value of the land, each employee who has been able to access the land holds $1 million.
And that's what I was segueing into, is that the land that was for much the sugar plantation, those lands were given to the workers in Caroni?
Yeah, initially the workers were allowed. We had about 9,000 employees. I was one, and you were allowed to apply for. If you did not own a residential parcel, you could apply for a residential parcel, and you could apply for agricultural land, and some of the distribution is still taking place, and they were entitled to do that. But in developing those lands, but the agricultural parcels in particular, we did not stop at as far as the records show, the demand was about 8,000. We actually went up to about 12,000. So those additional land are available for public distribution now. Then we made a promise in the closure of Petrotrin. We made a promise to those workers that they can access those agricultural lands and residential plots. So they now benefit, and we have a program that allows the national community to participate in the distribution of the residential plots.
Like rice, why is Trinidad not buying Guyana sugar? You're buying sugar from Guatemala instead of within CARICOM Guyana.
While I was in the sugar industry, it was not as intense that discussion, but I believe the discussion now is around this thing called plantation white. Now our significant demand for sugar is really around white sugar, because we have the soft drinks, for example, and all the beverages and most of the products for consumption require some input of sugar. So I think part of what is happening is the availability of a sugar that is not granulated sugar, but it could be used in some of the applications of granulated sugar. It's available in the region. I think that is part of it, and I think the other part of it has to do with what we discussed before, and that is the way in which the very mechanical way in which we handle some of these
Yeah, but Minister, the industrial sugar is separate from the domestic sugar we produce in the kitchen. And most of that is brown sugar, which Guyana produce some of the best in that context. So I was wondering why Trinidad not taking advantage of Guyana sugar and they go outside the region to get the sugar.
When we got out of the manufacturing, Guyana was the source for the brown, and it worked out good that some of our importers and the people who do, like Gopal Brothers, for example, people who do the bulk buying and the packaging and distribution, that they had linkages in Guyana, and the market here was flooded with Guyana brown. So that I think what has happened is that the import profile, in fact, the profile of importers has changed. So we have a larger pool of importers who are bringing bulk and breaking bulk and packaging and distributing, and it might be that they are sourcing from different areas, and you know, if there is, it may not be a tariff issue or a barrier issue. It may be on the way in which the profile of importers in the country has changed.
Yes, Senator Rambharat, how many barrels of oil Trinidad is producing today, and what is the price for a gallon of gasoline in Trinidad, or a liter?
Oh boy, you're really putting me out. You're putting me in some misery there. I want to leave that for my colleague, the Minister of Energy. I'm not going to. Okay. I'm not going to vent. I'm not going to vent your name, but I will encourage you to come on the program.
Let's give me your name. Trinidad and Tobago ranks 88 out of 140 countries in the world of doing business, and that is due to time-consuming procedures. This is a problem in most of the countries in the Caribbean, and inclusive in Guyana too. Why the time cannot be shortened for people to do business in Trinidad?
It is not that simple. In fact, I should send you via Devon the Prime Minister's speech today, and he really tackled that issue of the bureaucracy. Now, we could say, if you have a command economy, and if you're in a country where you could issue an it and it is carried out, then it's fine. But I think one has to be the colonial legacy of paper, and we've not transitioned out of paper. That is one. The bureaucracy, in fact, we are very bureaucratic. So we go through multiple levels and multiple layers, much of which are unnecessary, and that creates a lot of delays. And then the third thing has to do with the fragmentation of the bureaucracy. So you would find that to import something, you need maybe 5 ministries. So it might be that you import in meat, and you have to get one permit from the Ministry of Trade, one from the Ministry of Agriculture, something from the Ministry of Health. You have to interface with the port, which is the Ministry of Works. You have to interface with Customs, which is the Ministry of Finance. You have to deal with duties, which is the Ministry of Finance. And so that's simple. And then if you're doing construction, we have a program to make construction permitting a completely electronic activity. And we found that 22 parts of the state deal with a construction permit. So it goes through various state agencies. This is paper. It lands on somebody's desk, and the person is on 2 weeks vacation and remains right there. So we have a digital transformation project in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister has given us 2 years to start seeing the results of it. And that digital transformation is really to review our processes and to create electronic pathways to getting a transaction done, while at the same time digitizing our files so that our documents, so that the historic records are available, and also moving away from paper in terms of the forms, so that when you make new applications, you do it in the digital environment. I can't see it. It's not just the ease of doing business. It's the reshaping of our idea for bureaucracy and how we do it. And the technology. I mean, if you had made, Dr. Rose, if you had made an application for a particular permit and you weren't hearing anything, look at the opportunity exists where you could chat with a minister for 5 minutes, or you could talk about it, or your team and the ministry's team could talk from across the world, the different people involved, and the technology. And I think that we need to have more of our bureaucracy in discussion, dialogue, interaction, and solution oriented. I think too much of the bureaucracy is focused on how not to get something done, or not to make something happen. And the only way we could do this is by having private sector trained leadership in the public service. We have to, if we quantify the cost of inefficiency in the public service, it will justify paying people with the type of experience required to operate at the higher levels of the public service. And I'm not saying that as to cast any slur on the existing public service professionals. They could be trained and they could be upskilled, but to run a ministry in terms of the administrative side of a ministry, it is not just the technology, but it requires a mindset that is solutions oriented, understands how you have to smoothen bureaucracy.
During the last election campaign, the PNM campaign, People's National Movement campaign, on establishing midterm policy goals. One, to reduce the food bill. You mentioned that before, that it's not easy, cannot be easily done. Two, food inflation control, not first control food inflation prices. Three, increase of agriculture production. And four, increase employment in agriculture. Has any of this been achieved so far?
I think that we've seen more production coming, but increased production must not come in terms of creating glut. Increased production must be absorbed in such a way that it moderates the price that the consumer must pay and the price that the farmer gets, and you have to manage that relationship. So I would say that food inflation, no, because of what is happening in the global environment, we've not been able to control that. Food import, if we've made impacts on, in fact, by my 18th month in office, the food import bill had been lowered by $1 billion, and I told the Parliament it was not because of me, really. It had to do with Forex, and it had to do with things that were happening in the global environment. It had to do with pricing of commodities, which were low at the time. So that you would see the food import bill, you would see changes, some of which belong to public policy, but not all of it belong to policy. So on food import bill, I would say still a work in progress. On food inflation, challenge around the world in terms of what is happening globally. Increased production, yes, I would say the agriculture is always underreported by farmers. They tell all their pains and they don't tell their success stories. And fourth, employment, yes, but I would say one thing that I've said publicly: if it wasn't for our Venezuelan friends, we would have really struggled in agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. We owe a lot of what we do to the availability of Venezuelan labor.
Okay, good answer. Trinidad and Tobago, has the highest GDP per capita in the region based on purchasing power parity, PPP, and is considered a high-income economy or a high-income country. But with oil prices and the reduction of production of oil in Trinidad, and agriculture with declining prices, and your import bill for agriculture, which is about, I don't know, $580 million. Is it million or billion? I think it's $1 million. Yeah. Do you think that Trinidad and Tobago can sustain that status or maintain that status as a high-income country and with the highest GDP rank in the region?
Well, you could. It's not. To answer your question, it depends on our ability to sustain our revenue profile. We've lost significant amounts of revenue, notwithstanding the current energy prices. The current energy prices are fine, but production levels are down. So that we will continue to see that shortfall on the energy side. It is compensated in part by better performance on the manufacturing side and some of the other financial services and those things. Of course, all of this have been clouded by having to deal with COVID in terms of having to redirect expenditure, having to suffer, in terms of delays, having closures and those things, so that it is very difficult to gauge the economy in a post-COVID, a zero-COVID scenario. But it will be a challenge, especially with Guyana and the successes in Guyana. Of course, I expect Guyana we know that Guyana would rise to be, in terms of GDP, is a more significant player in the region, and of course we all stand to benefit from that, and I look forward to Trinidad and Tobago, given its proximity and the human resource capacity we have, the experience and the ability to work with Guyana. I look forward to seeing our country benefit from it.
Okay. The International Development Bank report, it was, I think, in 2019, stated that with 1.44 million people in Trinidad and Tobago, half of which are youths, Trinidad is running out of land to provide, and you're the Minister of Land as well, to provide house lots for the youths in Trinidad. How are you coping with that?
Well, it has to do with how we sold ourselves in terms of policy measures. Now, we developed an expectation among the citizens that it was the state that was going to provide a house on a 5,000 square foot lot for them. So our housing development company provided a certain number of houses built on a traditional lot. Over time, we moved to condos and townhouses and those things in both the private and the public sector. But we never really focus on developing private sector capacity to produce housing solutions. Now I say housing solutions as opposed to a house. So it is not possible to give every citizen who needs a house access to a house on a 5,000 square foot plot. Some will be able to should be able to access and afford apartments, condominiums, townhouses. Need more, high density housing, because we're not only looking at affordability. We're looking at the fact that we would run out of land, and we're competing for land. So it is not feasible. It is not feasible for the state anywhere in the world. There's nowhere in the world that the state is providing a house to every citizen who requires or demands a house, and it has to be housing solutions which include infrastructure improvements to your existing house. So, for example, a family home that could be expanded to accommodate a second or third family from within that same family. We have to do all those things if we have to be able to accommodate, and it is not a Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana issue. It is all global. In Canada, for example, one of the biggest issue in the Canadian election last year, the federal election, amongst young persons was the issue of housing and affordability of housing. And in the region, it will become more and more an issue as the state is challenged not only to find land but to fund that sort of.
On the same issue, in the last 10 or 15 years, various reports have shown that almost 30% of Trinidad's population have moved into the animal habitat or kingdom and displacing them. How are you going to rectify that situation?
Well, I really don't. I don't want to rely on your percentage, but I would say this: expansion of built development does in fact interfere with not only animal but the environment. It does in fact impact the built infrastructure. Interferes with everything in relation to the natural environment. Has it affected animals? We do population count. We do not see that level of displacement, but we know that over time it will be affected if we don't do two things. If we don't have at least a minimum acreage, and that is why we protect the forest reserves. A minimum acreage that we could have our animal habitat, and acreage that we could encourage built development. But the other part about it is the way in which we build. So we see, I see it in Guyana, in the new developments, that we clear completely and we build. And we do not build in a way that we could still sustain animal population, bird population, some element of home agriculture, and the ponds and the retention ponds and the ability to live in cooler environments. I still don't see a lot of that taking place, so that we could build, we could do housing, and we could do commercial, but we could also strike a balance between building and maintaining some of the natural characteristics, especially those that sustain wildlife but also cool. We have all our buildings now being air conditioned, all our schools being air conditioned, and we're not building to take advantage of natural airflow and planting trees and building infrastructure in a way in which we're not fully exposed to the sun.
Does Trinidad have a rainforest?
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't say Trinidad.
Tobago.
In region Tobago is one of the most celebrated forests in the world. I don't think parts of it I would say has the characteristics of rainforest, but Trinidad, our forest reserves in Trinidad are essentially some are commercial, and some are going to be there as part of the natural environment.
My last question, and this is on the lighter side. But a couple of years ago, I was in Trinidad, Port of Spain, have lots of dogs. Is Port of Spain considered dog city? Is that true?
I do think so. Well, parts of it. I walk as part of my exercise every day, and I was walking with my walking partner Brian Lewis, who is the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, and Brian asked me why people walk with these sticks. I said it's because of the dogs. So in I would say St. James, if you talk about dogs in Trinidad in the city, It might be St. James heading up to Fort George. We have some dogs there, but I would say in the city itself, I don't see a lot of it. And then maybe when you get into the rural communities, you don't see it. But I would say, however, that Trinidad and Tobago has gotten very North American in the way it treats its pets. In terms of, because also the living environment, so you have the townhouses and the condos. So I've been saying to my colleagues that we have to start building doggy parks in the city in particular, because a lot of these animals are in-house and they need to come out and to socialize and to exercise and those things, and keep them off the streets.
Okay, Charles, over to you.
Minister, I was looking through your organizational structure, July 2021, and it seems to me you have Hollywood there in your ministry. The permanent secretary, the two deputy permanent secretary, and the chief technical officer are all acting.
We have 1,000 acting positions we have 1,000 vacant positions, and we have more than 900 acting. And last night, my boss asked me a question about a vacancy that somebody retired from a position. Next year would make it 10 years the person retired, and the position has not been filled. And his question to me was, obviously, it was known that this person would retire at age 60, and why weren't things put in place for replacement? And that is across the public sector. People are acting a significant, I would say it has to be upwards of 25% in acting positions, and it has to do with the fact that many of us have allowed our public service to be filled by an independent body, in our case the Public Service Commission, over which the executive has no control. And if you were in the private sector, the bank, Republic Bank, or anywhere, BP, Exxon would not say to a part of the federal bureaucracy, you fill my position. So they wouldn't say that. And if we have to operate as counterparts to the private sector, we have to match what they do.
And yeah, but when someone is acting in a position, they're robbed of their pension, their true pension, when they retire, because I don't think the pension is paid on the acting position.
Well, if they act for two years or more, the pension would be paid. The thing about it is they may act for several years and not be confirmed, and then continue towards retirement date in a lower position. There are a number of reasons why, a number of problems with it, so that when somebody is acting, then people right down the line would act, and it creates, this is just not the uncertainty in one position, but all those positions that are acting on account of somebody acting, and it's a lot of uncertainty. I tell you the other problem we face. We consider ourselves to be a specialized ministry, in the sense that we have livestock, and we must have certain skills and professional skills. And sometimes, because of the need for people to be promoted for the purpose of compensation, we may find somebody who is a very good technical specialist in one area having to move to another area to get a higher range in the
Minister, we're getting the closing time now, but I know you're married, and the late Prime Minister Patrick Manning, I think his wife's name was Camille, and your wife's name is Camille as well. Does that mean that are we looking at the future Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago?
Oh my gosh.
Well, I would shoot that down right away, because Patrick Manning's wife is...
Oh, it is not Camille,
so
okay. That was
Camille. Prime ministers must have a seat in the lower house. You know my track record in trying to sit in the lower house. I've failed on 2 attempts, and I wanna do my job the job that I have now.
You know, the great
I'm happy
inventors of electricity, he also failed hundreds of times until he produced electricity, right? So,
well, I have a few hundred times to
Minister,
go
we want
still.
to thank you so much for taking your time out tonight to be on our program. And we look forward to some future time when we can have you again to discuss the interrelation between Guyana and Trinidad, and of course the region, as hopefully that Trinidad and Guyana, we're so common in so many ways that we can be a great team in the development of our region. So, Minister, in closing, any last word?
I want to thank you. I was very, very happy to be invited by my colleague Rohan Sinanan and then by you. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to come back. I will encourage my colleagues. I would say to them it's a nice way to spend a Monday evening because it would help all of us in the region if we have discussion, dialogue, and if we talk about how we could solve.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rose, anything in closing?
Yes, I have. No offense to anyone, but I'm coming back with my beefs. Better internet services are needed in Guyana. Government offices should not be closed during lunch hour. Newly appointed public servants should not wait for the first paycheck 3 months after being appointed. And public servants should answer their telephones. And I have a fifth one. Our young people, our young professionals are leaving the shores of Guyana, migrating to other parts of the Caribbean. So I'm advocating $125,000 a starting salary, $125,000 as a starting salary for nurses, for teachers, and for policemen in order to keep them in the country. $125,000. With cost of living today, that is about the minimum you should pay these people. So, well, those who are here, let them hear.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. We have Mr. Darren Wood, the CEO from Exxon, is there. So maybe if we can renegotiate our contract, we might have enough money to pay all those things you're talking about. So to all our viewers out there, we want to thank you so much. To Minister, thank you again for being with us. And until next week, God bless you, God bless Trinidad and Tobago, and God bless Guyana. Thank you very much.